Thank you so much for joining me on the way forward. I'm very pleased to have with me Dr. Erin Lynch. She is the president of a national education research nonprofit, but then also a digital data storyteller. I saw her work on social media, advocating for HBCUs, but using data to do it. And I think that is a very important conversation to have. So let's have it right now. Dr. Lynch, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining me. You're an HBCU advocate. However, you and I have something in common. We have a couple of things in common, but one thing that we have in common is that we did not get our undergraduate degrees from HBCUs. What's your story? How did you become an advocate?
Yeah, so I actually have a video about that, right? I grew up in Fairfax County, right, Northern Virginia, where the standard just kind of was you going to college. You finish high school, you're going to college. That's just how it is in the DMV. And um, I had many options. My mother attended Tennessee State for a hot second. She also attended West Virginia State for a hot second, and said both those schools were too much of party schools for her. And she went back to Cincinnati and graduated from University of Cincinnati. But she tried to instill in me very early on that I should consider HBCUs as my undergraduate experience. Now, this was my flaw in thinking, though. When I started looking at the HBCU undergraduate experience, I saw it as a limiting factor, right?
Mhm.
I was attending a high school that had 45 different languages, 44 different countries represented in that high school alone. And I was like, why would I go to a school that's just all Black folks? Like, that doesn't make no sense to me. And so I had this really small minded perspective of what an HBCU experience would give me at the undergraduate level, right? So that was my first thing. So I didn't even look, right? I didn't think to apply to any HBCUs as an undergraduate. Secondary factor, though, was I was a student athlete, and so I was being recruited not by HBCUs. So
Mhm.
I ended
Mhm.
up going to James Madison on a track scholarship. No HBCUs wanted to recruit me in track and field, so I ended up going to D1 CAA school to do track and field, and had a great time, great experience. Um, but I think it was that perspective I had coming out of high school that really dissuaded me from thinking about HBCUs as an option, right? Even though I was quite familiar with HBCUs, right? Grew up as a Cosby kid, watching Cosby, different world, all the things. My mother's HBCU attendee. My godmother, Aunt Sandy, graduated from Tennessee State, right? So it's not that I wasn't familiar with HBCUs. I just didn't think that they were schools that would provide me the best opportunity
Yeah.
until I worked at one,
Yeah.
right? Until I worked
Yeah.
at one. And so
Same here.
right. Right. And so that's how that came about, right? So I ended up attending Tennessee State for my first doctorate as a graduate research student. And so I was both attending and working there, and it completely shifted my mindset, right?
Yeah.
Completely shifted my mindset. And so I have since worked at two HBCUs. I have since stepped foot on 78 HBCU campuses. I
Wow.
work very closely with our institutions and the work that we do at QEM. And then, of course, my personal research is in that space. So yeah, so that's how I became an advocate, because I went from being almost like a hater to being a lover of our HBCUs. So yeah, that's the story.
So that's the other thing we have in common. I mean, the love developed as employees. My first PR job was at Southern University of New Orleans, and the first commencement that we did, I fell in love, and it's been really cool. And the third thing is that we're both Tennessee State alumni, so
Go Big Blue.
I don't hesitate to tell people down in New Orleans about the land of the golden sunshine.
That's right.
So you know, one of the things that struck me in watching your videos is how heavily you believe in data. Um, this may seem like a duh question, but why is that so important?
Yeah. So I use this phrase, feel facts and real facts.
Yeah.
And so, we often develop what we believe on field facts. And so I take that back to my HBCU choice, right? So I did not go to an HBCU because I felt
Yep.
as though it was going to be a limiting factor for me in my career, right? I felt as though going to an environment that was predominantly Black was going to somehow stunt or limit my career options, right? I felt that I wasn't going to have the same growth of experiences that I had coming out of high school, right? None of those were real facts. They were all field facts. And so as a social scientist, I really want people to understand the difference between the two. And so to do that, I just hit him in the face with the data, right? And so, like, just smack him on the forehead with the data and force folks to have conversations about, what the data mean, what the data say, so that they can develop different perspectives with actual authentic information, right? Now there's something to be said about the lived experience, but there is also something to be said about what the data say about a certain thing that you might have a perspective about, and how that can help to shape it. So I'm very, very, I guess, biased, right, into the role that data has in shaping our perspectives. And so I just want to make sure that the general public has as much access to information as possible about our schools, that helps put them in a positive light. So that's the biggest thing. We're always seeing the bad stuff, but how about the good stuff?
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I know about
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I got to give you a little bit of a hard time. Um, okay, some of the videos that I have to have a good chuckle about is when people like to argue with you about your data. So how do you remain so composed? Because I mean, you're the one, you're the expert. You see this stuff, you break it down, you analyze it, you have a grip on it, you know the sources, all of that good stuff. How do you stay so composed when people want to come at you about this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if I am so composed. Maybe that's what you see on camera, but
Hey, you know what? All right.
right,
Hey, listen,
right,
listen, Doc, take some advice
right,
from your PR guy. As long as that's what they see on camera,
right.
we're good.
Right, because I would never say behind the scenes like this, right? Like,
Beep, 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 beep,
yes,
beep.
exactly. Like that's exactly what my insides are saying,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But again, I go back to, like, I'm a teacher, right?
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
trained to be a teacher. I'm a trained teacher, and sometimes I just have to remind myself. And this is a lot like being in the classroom. Like, you just gonna have some folks in the classroom who just aren't gonna get it, right?
Yeah.
No matter what you try to do, no matter what you present, they're just not gonna pass the test. And so I often feel like that's the case. No matter what I put before people, like, they gonna have their own perceptions of something, right? Even if I give them all the data, like, well, this says this says this says this. Well, I still don't believe it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then there's nothing more than I can, right? There's nothing more I can do that. And I'll give you a very clear example. So I had this one video I had this one video go viral. It's up to like 3.5 million views or something crazy. And it was about, I stitched together two videos. One of a guy talking about how the snow that he was trying to burn with his blowtorch
Oh goodness, I saw
wasn't
that one.
melting. Right, right. And then I stitched together another video showing how snow stoves work, right? And then I broke down the physics of why the first guy who was expecting the snow to just evaporate, or not evaporate, to just melt in his hand, why that wasn't accurate, right? And the comments, right, just went crazy on this video. But the most impactful comment, I think, the one that stuck with me the longest, was this one guy who said that, weather manipulation is real. And I was like, well, it's not. But let me give you some sources to help to help show you why it's not real. I can understand why you would think that it is, right? Because
Hmm.
we had some really, bad actors, scientists back in the day
Yeah.
who were constantly trying to convince the federal government that it was real to get money to be able to do this work that they knew they couldn't do. Um, But yeah, so I understand, where you're coming from that, but let me give you some sources to show you that it's actually not a thing. Like, it's not real.
Mhm.
It's not a thing. This person's response was, I am not going to read your science because I know who paid for it. I will trust my own lived experiences. Well, you know what? All right. Okay. And this conversation is over, because
Yeah.
that's the type of person, right, who gets into the comments to argue over, no, it's not a two, it's a 2.3. And that means what? No, like, okay, why are you, it's like right there. It's right there. Why are you arguing this? Right. So, yeah. So I definitely have a good old time with those comments. And I appreciate every single one because they drive the algorithm. So if you want to get in my comments and leave a stupid remark, I am all for the stupid remarks, because you are driving the algorithm to get these videos to the people who really do need to see it, about how great our HBCUs are. So come on in my comments with your stupid racist comments and things, and the attacks on me and my IQ and
Yeah.
all the things. Come for it. I am
Yeah.
all for the comments because they're just driving the algorithm for me. So
Mm. In the words of that Afro American poet, plies. I ain't gonna argue with you.
right.
But you know what? You bring up bad actors in science. I don't want to derail the conversation, but when we have people who, in good faith, really don't understand the HBCU world, and they do want to separate the bad actors from the people who are doing ethical science, um, what kinds of resources can people access as far as understanding that kind of data, especially education data, so that they can better understand HBCUs and they can understand what you're talking about, and then they can also separate out who might be the bad actors?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are a number of bad actors in the HBCU space,
Yeah.
and I say that not to say that it's coming from the HBCUs, right? There are a number of folks who have built their careers on researching HBCUs, not ever having worked at or for or been educated by an HBCU. I do a video about those folks too, and I call them colonizers, right? So these colonizing researchers who want to come in and try to explore our institutions, without any type of affiliation to our institutions, other than they just want some articles and things. You're seeing that a lot more now with social media journalism too, right? So there's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
there's a handful of journalists. I put that loosely. Um,
Yeah.
Let me rephrase it. There are a handful of folks who have background and training in journalism who have now opted to only do bad news stories about HBCUs because,
Mm.
they're able to get the clickbait from the community on social media. So yeah, so there are a number of them. And what I would say for the general public is just go find the primary data sources.
Yeah.
Right, just go find the primary data source. And AI is not a primary data source. Like, I just had this conversation with like 13 researchers from across the world today.
not
AI
not
is not a
not
data source.
clauding them.
No, not clawing them. I mean, no clawing them, no co-plot, none of them. No, go to the actual data sources. So either
Yeah.
go to the institution's website to find the information. Go to iPads. iPads is my hands down favorite. Everybody knows in the video, I pull all my data from iPads. And so literally I just Google IPEDS. Boom, that's the first website that comes up, iPads, the Integrated Post Secondary Education data set. And then a lot of times the federal government will have resources. So iPads is a federal database, but then the federal government will have resources, right? So IES and
Mhm.
CSES, which is the National Center for Educational Statistics. The National Science Foundation has great data sets, right? All of these are publicly available, right? And so the same folks who, my girlfriends and I tease that, like, I'm the FBI agent in the group, so we need to find anything. I'm the one finding it. And everybody's got one of those friends, right? So what I would say
Uh-huh.
is to the folks, find who that person is in your friend group who's like, okay, well, let me go down the rabbit hole and try to see what I can find. Tell them to go start searching some of these databases and see what they can find, and then bring that to the conversation. But yeah, they're all available. So
Yeah, my wife, yeah, one of her sorors was the FBI agent for me,
See?
and
Mhm.
yeah, I found out I had been researched thoroughly in the dating
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all public, right? So you want to look
Yeah,
at what people are getting paid. You go to their 990s, right? You want to look at what
yeah,
organizations are contributing money into whom. You go to their 990s, right? You want to see what student graduation rates look like. You go to iPads. It's all publicly available information.
yeah. You're listening to The Way Forward. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Dr. Erin Lynch. She is the president of a national education research nonprofit, also a digital data storyteller. We're talking about advocacy for HBCUs and um, I mean, again, my PR career started at an HBCU. I did marketing and communications at three other HBCUs. So what I'm about to ask you, I had to take a deep breath before before I ask this question. Is there a specific misconception about HBCUs that you find yourself constantly addressing?
Um, yes. So even within our community, I often find that I have to address that our schools are lesser than in some sort of way.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
even in the Black community, I am constantly having to argue that our schools are lesser than in some sort of way, and even to the point to the detriment of the argument. Right? Case in point.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you saw the story of what happened in North Carolina A&T. So there was some funny business that went on with employees, right? Misappropriating money, violating policy for the financial benefit of themselves and their friends, right? And so when the story came out, suddenly folks were attacking the new administration at that institution. And folks were upset that the new administration at that institution had the nerve to come in and try to, remove these people. Ready for this context? Because they do it at white schools all the time. So why can't we? What? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Like if we value our institutions, if we know that as a group of institutions we are that much better at creating black professionals, the black middle class, black doctors, lawyers, and judges. If we know that we are better at all of those things, why would we be okay with subpar or even illegal practices
Hmm.
going on at our schools just because the white schools do it? Like, so
Hmm.
I am constantly having to battle our own people about what we find acceptable and what they think is okay because they believe that we are lesser than schools, right? And I just, so that is the biggest thing for me. That is the
Yeah,
biggest thing.
yeah. And it's really interesting. This is a running dialogue that I have, and I learned it by working at HBCUs. That is really interesting to me how quick we are to beat up on one another. But when it comes to something that needs to be corrected, we're just like, oh, well, that's just what we do. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I mean, in your last example, I'm all for professional development if people simply didn't know what they were doing and they need to be upskilled. That I get. But if you're doing something wrong and it's to
Mhm.
the detriment to the institution, you do have to make a hard choice
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
And I just find that when it comes to HBCUs, it's this really interesting thing that we have when we just seem to go in this really weird gear almost at
Yeah.
the wrong time a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. I'll give you two other examples. So you remember the situation that just occurred with Tuskegee and their housing,
Hmm.
right? Happens all the time.
Common situation.
All the time. But why does a story like that for Tuskegee get 100,000 views and comments? But the exact same thing will happen at a University of Greensboro or a Dayton College or
Hmm.
wherever. Like I don't know if those schools actually have those things happen, but you know my point. Exact same thing will happen at one of those schools, but it doesn't become this national, news on social media, right? the story that just happened with Bowie State. And so I did a
Mm-hmm.
video about that too, right? So Bowie State ended up having to lay off some folks. But the thing was, they weren't laying off folks who already had jobs. They were just getting rid of positions that were still vacant. So there weren't even people in those jobs, right? They were just cutting positions. Um, so it made this national news, this big, wide story. John Hopkins, also in Maryland, just announced yesterday they're laying off 100 people.
Mm.
Not cutting positions. No, they are laying off 100 people, right? And that is an institution that last year spent $3.2 billion on research. That's what they expended last year on research, $3.2 billion. And they're laying off 100 people. Where's the uproar?
Yeah.
Where's
Yeah.
the people talking about, oh, I can't believe, what is their president doing? They're laying off. Where's the uproar? Right? But we
Yeah.
get that type of response about our HBCUs, and we don't see the exact same energy for the other institutions. And that's bothersome because it's primarily coming from our community. It is
Mm-hmm.
primarily coming from
Mm-hmm.
our community, right?
Yeah.
And it deeply pains me when folks go out here and because the institution hurt them in some kind of way, they feel like that their way to get back is to also try to hurt the institution. They don't understand that that has a much greater impact than they think, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it bothers me a great deal.
Yeah. So let's shift to positive impact.
Yeah.
Besides, and let's shift to positive impact as far as what the community can do. Besides giving, because we know that's always going to
Mhm.
be the top answer. But besides giving, what can people do to do their part to support HBCUs, especially the people with HBCUs in their communities?
Mhm.
What kinds of things do you think would be helpful?
Well, see, I'm gonna ask you that, right? Because you're the marketing and media specialist. So when you were at the institution, right, and I know you know the answer to this, how many positive stories did you have to put out to be able to counter one negative story? Because y'all have a number. I know y'all do. Well, what was the number for you all?
Why you gotta bring up old stuff and why you gotta trigger me? Why you gotta do that?
Because there is a metric. There is a metric. So tell the folks out there in Radio Land, what is the metric for how many positive stories you need to put out to counter one negative one?
I don't know the exact metric, but I do know that it probably took me a good 5 to 10 press
That's it.
releases.
It's 5 to 1.
Yeah,
It's 5 to 1. Yep. So
yeah.
that's the standard metric, right? I need
Mhm.
5 good stories to counter one negative story. And so that's what I would tell people to do, right? You might not have the ability to give, but you can get on social media and do 30 seconds of, I had this great experience over here at such and such school. You will
Mhm.
not believe what they're doing in the community right now. Like that type of positivity. Even though you might think that it's completely random, the algorithm will feed into it, right? Say something positive about an HBCU and just hashtag it HBCU. That's it.
Mhm.
It will go into that giant pool of information about HBCUs and social media. That is a profound help,
Yeah.
right? That is a profound help. And then hashtag the school or even at the school, right? You're saying something positive. But stop putting out these bad stories. Like go ahead and put out some positive things. Even if it's something very small. I was walking across the campus, in I don't know, Normal or Institute, West Virginia, right? Like some
Mhm.
random. Just walking across campus in Institute, West Virginia, and I just couldn't help but note how wonderful the landscaping was here at West Virginia State. Like something
Yeah.
just that simple. Something
Yeah.
just that simple would be lovely, right?
Yeah. And I would add to that it, for this radio show every single week, I go to the websites of all of the local colleges and universities because I want to find something positive to report. And people don't realize this, but if you go to the news pages of a lot of these institutions, there is something there you can be proud of.
Oh,
There is
absolutely.
some story there, and it may be a small story, but there's definitely something that you can be proud of. I want to end by asking this question. I don't want to get you in trouble, and I don't want to get myself in trouble. However, there are those HBCUs that don't get as much attention as some of the more popular HBCUs. And so, if you had to think about a couple of HBCUs, um, not that other HBCUs are bad in any other way or any way, but if you had to think of a couple of HBCUs where you said to yourself, People really need to know what's happening at this institution. Are there any that come to mind?
Absolutely. All of the HBCCs.
Oh,
And so people often forget that
huh.
HBCUs are the four-year universities.
Yeah.
HBCCs are the community colleges,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so Alabama has the number one highest number of HBCCs in the country. And the work that is coming out of our HBCCs, absolutely incredible work, right? The work at Lawson State, absolutely incredible in science, right? The work that's coming out of Hines Community College,
Mm.
absolutely amazing, right?
Over
The
there in
work in
Mississippi,
Denmark
yeah.
Tech. Yep, Denmark Tech is doing some
Hmm.
great things in engineering technical studies. Drake State is doing some really great things, right? So there are these amazing group of institutions that people often forget. I was at an airport. I was on a plane and actually had on a shirt that and someday I'm gonna fact check this shirt. But I had this shirt that says, HBCUs produce like 80% Black doctors, 40%
Oh,
of
yeah.
Black engineers. That shirt, right? And so this guy, I was getting on the airplane and he was noticing my shirt. But then when we got off to get our bags, he and his colleague came up to me, and, real thick accent. He was like, "I just want to ask you about your shirt." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, what about it?" And he was like, "What does it mean?" And what is an HBCU? And so I, took the time to explain this to this gentleman who, my first very discriminatory glance, I thought he could have been at January 6th, storming the steps. But he had a very earnest question about my shirt
Yeah.
and what an HBCU was. And when I told him what they were, and I told them, he was from Alabama, and I told him, Alabama was actually the number one state for the number of HBCUs, and their production of amazing workforce and talent and all the things. He was like, "Oh, well, I went to Lawson State." I was like, "So you went to an HBCU?" He didn't even know.
Yeah.
He didn't even know. He didn't even know that, he got a degree from Lawson State. And I was like, that's one of the best HBCCs in Alabama. I said, so you went to an HBCU. You are an HBCU grad, right? He was like, well, I wouldn't say I was a grad because, I just went there for my associates. You finished the program, which means you completed and graduated. So
You
yes, you are
finished,
HBCU grad.
yes.
Right, right. But the funny thing is, like, he didn't know. He
Huh.
didn't know. And so, we were able to walk away from that conversation with him being enlightened and me, having to check my check my biases.
Yeah.
Because here this man was, a very clear HBCU grad. So yeah.
That
So
is
those would be the group
outstanding.
of schools. Yeah.
That is outstanding, Dr. Erin Lynch. She is the president of a national education research nonprofit, also a digital data storyteller. Thank you so much for joining me on the way forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.